morning, everybody. Welcome to our last virtual PBIS Leaders Network. This morning, our last one that we're going to have will be in May, and that will be in person, but this is our last virtual meeting. We'd like to welcome you guys, and if you're listening to the recording, welcome as well. And we are going to go ahead and get started. We are recording, so for those of you that are in person, make sure that you realize that we're recording this morning. And there is the bit.ly. I know Rachel put it in the chat. That is the bit.ly for this morning's presentation. You probably will want to have access to that because there are many links that you'll want to access, and it's easier to do it right from the slides. So go ahead and get the bit.ly. So we were going to start with kind of a connection circle today, and I think I'm probably going to skip that since we have not a lot of folks on this morning. But this is an example of a community building activity that your teachers can do. And I did want to share it with you. It was just recently shared with me from Stephanie Martinez. I don't know if those of you that are listening or on this morning remember Stephanie, but Stephanie came and did some restorative practices work with our region several years ago. And she had sent this to me and said, you know, your schools may be interested in this. So this is a resource that your teachers can use. It's called the First Five. And basically what it is, it's a daily email that comes into your inbox at about 7 a.m. with 9 different activities that help build community in your classrooms. So what I was going to do this morning, if we had a few more people, which we do not, would be to have you guys choose which genre of music that you like. And those of you that know me know which genre I like, and I'm very particular about that. And we were going to kind of just do a kind of a community connection circle this morning. But again, since we have not a lot of folks on, we won't do that. But for today, if you look on top of that, you can only pick one graphic. There's a link there for what the activity for this day would be. There are 9 different things that you can do to build community. Generally, there's like a meme, there's a video, there's a other different types of activities, greeting at the door activities that you can do with students. And these are just some examples on the screen. And on the left side in the left upper right hand corner is a link directly to the First Five if you'd like to sign up and subscribe. So it is really kind of cool. I subscribed a couple weeks ago, and I've been getting really interesting things in my inbox daily. But the point of it is that teachers don't have to do any kind of preparation. They can just get out, look in their email, look at what activity they want to do, kind of pop it up on a smartboard if they want, and then they can build community for the first 5 minutes of class. They have an elementary link, and they have a secondary link. So there's for the little itty bitties and then for the older kids too. Really, really kind of cool. And it takes no preparation on the teacher's part. So we would like to share that with you. We won't do the activity this morning, but this is really kind of a neat thing and was shared with me. And I really think it's really kind of a neat way to build community in classrooms. The bit.ly again is in the chat. If you would like to follow along with the slides, I see we had a couple other folks joining us this morning. I'm assuming that we'll have a couple more join late, but this is what we are going to cover today. We're going to do our last 2 classroom practices. We're going to talk a little bit about Tier 2 meeting agendas. We're seeing some trends and patterns within the region. And then the last part of our meeting will be updates, general updates for the region, state, and regional updates for you this morning. So we have this year in our network, we've really been talking about using some of the tools for classroom practices to solidify that fidelity of doing Tier 1 implementation for PBIS. We have covered 6 of the 8, and today we're just going to go over the last 2 classroom practices that exist, and some of the tools that your teachers can use or your PBIS teams can use as you continue to roll out Tier 1 and strengthen your Tier 1 structures. These are the first 4, and we've discussed all of them so far this year. The expectations and roles, procedures and routines, encouraging expected behavior, and then discouraging the behavior that we don't want to see in our classrooms. And then we also did opportunities to respond and adjusting task difficulty. The 2 that we're going to focus on today and just kind of share with you would be the active supervision strategy and activity sequencing and choice. So those are the 8 that we talk about really that should be occurring in any school age classroom to make sure that we are doing tier 1 with fidelity and making sure that we are covering that in our classrooms. And Michelle's going to just talk a little bit about reminding us what it looks like in the early childhood classroom.
Yeah, so you'll see on the screen the 5 early childhood classroom practices that should be happening. And when we think about active supervision and we think about activity sequencing and choice, all of those components hold true in an early childhood classroom. You just want to keep the lens of that developmentally appropriate practice. When you're thinking about active supervision, that the adults in that classroom are getting down at the child's level, they're moving around with that child. There's no hidden areas where kids can hide within that classroom. And then when you're thinking about activity sequencing and choice, all of those components hold true, again, at that developmentally appropriate level, giving kids choice of centers they may visit or materials they may be using or friends that they might be interacting with across the classroom.
Thanks, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
So the last two, again, were the active supervision is one of them. And really this means making sure that teachers are actively moving, scanning, and interacting with students. As Michelle said, some of those kind of areas that are unsupervised or areas, corners, or places where kids could potentially have behaviors, and that's where we see behaviors. It's really important that teachers are aware of how they actively supervise. I know that it is seems like a no-brainer sort of, but it's really important that we are paying attention to that, because in my experience as an educator as well as a parent, I know that all the times where my kids had the most issues were the times when it was unsupervised or unstructured time. So it's really important that we make sure that teachers are paying attention to that active supervision. That means within their class, and definitely as you go up in grades, and for the little ones too, in the hallways, especially during change of class and times when kids are unsupervised. It's very important for adults to have that active supervision. And then the second one we talk about as the kind of the last one for our network this year is the activity sequencing and choice. And that really is giving first of all, choice being giving students options, whether that be in the mode that they show what they know, how they perform a task, or how they learn a task. It's kind of like those UDL considerations. And then also, how do we structure tasks so that we don't get behaviors? In other words, are there ways we can put easier tasks in front of more difficult tasks? Or can we intersperse tasks so that students can build kind of a momentum so that they don't have behaviors? What I did want to remind you of, so that's kind of what we talk about with activity sequencing and choice. And on this next slide, there are direct links to those tools that we talk about, the teacher tools. And I'm just going to pull it up real quickly to show you what is involved in the teacher tool. It really gives you what the definition of that strategy. We have them for all of the 8 practices, school age practices. You have what actually the practice is. You have a little self-assessment that teachers can take. And then on the second page of every tool is what they call a practice profile. And that really is a rubric as to what the practice, an exemplary example of what that practice looks like, all the way to where it's really far from proficient. So we encourage all teams, all PBIS teams, any tier really, all PBIS teams to really look at some of the tools that are available to you and to really share them with your PBIS team as well as the teachers in your building. I think they're really neat, easy, compact ways to look at some of these practices. And I know a lot of you guys have heard me say this probably ad nauseum. We don't know that tier 1 is really done with fidelity unless PBIS is occurring in the classroom. And so it's great that we have it in those common areas, but if it's not occurring in the classroom, we can't say that we're doing tier 1 PBIS with fidelity. So that's why we chose to spend the whole network this year on looking at some of these teacher tools. There are other teacher tools out there, and I think we've shared them. And if you're interested, you can ask any one of your PBIS consultants, but there are other tools as well that you can use for classroom practices. I kind of like the teacher tools because I like the idea that the definition is given, the self-assessment is given, and I really like the idea of that practice profile because it shows you what it should look like as an exemplar, and then it shows you what it looks like when it's really far from what the practice is. I know that Rachel will continue to put the links in the slide in the chat, the links to the slide in the chat, and we'll continue to kind of move on this morning. So please utilize those links, because I think they're good for any PBIS team to look at to make sure that we are really implementing PBIS in the classroom. It's really, really important. Thanks, Nicole. Rachel did put the link there in the chat. Thanks for doing that, Rachel. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pivot. We have covered now all of the A practices again. Make sure that, you know, if you guys have questions or if you need other types of materials or resources to support PBIS in the classroom, that you reach out to us. There's a lot of things out there. We try to be very strategic by what we share, because there's a lot out there and it can be extremely overwhelming. But if there are other things that you guys need for your PBIS teams, make sure you reach out and we can get those things to you as well. So we're going to pivot now and talk a little bit about Tier 2. The reason why we're bringing this up in a network meeting is because we are finding some themes as we are continuing to do TFIs in the region and working with teams on Tier 2. We are seeing some trends and patterns, I'll say, as far as TFI scoring is concerned. And one of them is how your Tier 2 interventions are being tracked and monitored. So this is an area when we do TFIs in the region where we see teams struggling a bit. And they're struggling because the practices are there for the most part. They are doing the interventions, but they're not really using any kind of tool, or they're not really building into their agendas ways to look at their Tier 2 and if it's being successful and with whom. So what we want to really think about when we're looking at Tier 2 in your agendas is that how are the teams using that outcome data and your decision rules for monitoring the intervention and knowing when to modify the actual intervention for the student. So what we're not really seeing being at least captured in the notes are things like the percentage of students enrolled in the Tier 2 supports. What the TFI would say would be you should scoop up at least 5% of your total population. Now, typically we know that Tier 2 is like a healthy system would be about 10 to 15%. But the TFI tool says you got to have at least 5%. I had this conversation yesterday at a TFI I was doing in the afternoon, and it was that we were having this very conversation. So how are you really capturing that in your notes? How do we know the number of students participating in the interventions, whether that be check in, check out, small group, self-monitoring strategy? You know, I had a simple behavior plan, possibly any of those strategies. How do we know who is being entered into those interventions? How do we know how many kids are graduating, in other words, being successful, that they don't need that intervention anymore? And then how do we know the number of students who are requiring additional supports? Generally, when we look at these notes and minutes that Tier 2 teams are taking, I know myself, I'm not seeing that captured, and the TFI is going to push to say, how do we know, and what are those percentages and what are those numbers? So that's something that we wanted to bring to the network, because it is kind of thematic. We're seeing it as a theme as we're doing TFIs with Tier 2 teams in the region. So this is a modified example, and I'm not saying that you need to do this exactly in your notes, but this is something that is given to us from PBIS, the gurus at PBIS, about one way that you could capture some of this information. If you see the red arrow on your screen, you'll see that within these meeting notes, there is a specific section that addresses how many students are meeting the goal, how many students are not meeting the goal, how many students are being fated to self-management, and then in this particular case, how many students need more intensive supports, possibly being recommended for a Tier 3 intervention. Of course, we would have decision rules for that, but how are those students, how do we know those students are ready for a Tier 2 intervention? There's also above that, where are we at percentage-wise with students receiving Tier 2? And then when are we going to check again to see how many students we're scooping up in that Tier 2? And as the minutes go down further, it'll talk a little bit about their data and what we're using to support making sure students are on track or being fated. But what I really wanted to draw your attention to is that middle section there. there in these notes, there is a specific part that really looks at how, what are we doing as far as students in the intervention, students being successful, and students who are going to be faded, or maybe students who need additional supports. So generally speaking, we're not really, I know I personally, I won't speak for the other consultants, but I know I personally am not seeing that being captured in the notes. And when we go to do the TFI, it's hard to answer those questions because we're not seeing them being that information being captured. So we wanted to bring this to your attention. We do have somebody with us that's going to talk a little bit about their particular practice as far as how they capture that information in their minutes. So I'm going to throw it to Michelle, and I know Christina is going to get on and kind of talk about how their program with the Akron Early Learning Program captures this information.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So the Akron Early Learning Program received a silver level designation last year as part of the recognition process. And we had asked Christina Smith, who serves as the data manager for that Tier 2 leadership team, to join us this morning and talk a little bit about how they structure their leadership team meeting agenda each month that their Tier 2 team meets. And as Christina takes you down through that meeting agenda, keep the TFI kind of tucked back, those items into the back of your mind, because their meeting agenda really does serve as the central hub for their Tier 2 system. So as she talks down through that, see if you can pick up on how they're supporting some of those items for Tier 2 within the TFI. Heidi, can you click on the link at the bottom of the slide that says Tier 2 agenda template? Oh, access did not work. I'm gonna go ahead and go back. Chris, if you're there,
I'm here.
I'll just have you talk through how that's done. Or you know what, Heidi, I can share my screen. I have their agenda up on my screen.
Michelle, let me just make sure you should have access to do that.
I have access.
Okay. You go ahead and share. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see that screen?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Chris, go ahead and take it away. If you could just take us down through how the team uses that agenda on a monthly basis, that would be great.
So we meet once a month for our Tier 2 team, and some of us meet weekly to go over some of the data, but as a whole Tier 2 team, we meet monthly, and we use this form to guide us through our meetings. So the top is just taking attendance, making sure we have, the majority of the people on the team attend, and then just filling in some of those things underneath: location, date, things like that. And then we call to order. We, review previous meeting minutes, give some shout outs to people on the staff or people on the team. We talk about upcoming Tier 2 professional development that we're planning at staff meetings or, instructional improvement days. Fill it, discuss any unfinished business, new business. And the new business, a lot of the time, is just looking at the latest data. So we fill in the information on that data based on our BIRs. Those are our behavior incident reports that we use in preschool because we don't have another way to track our behavior. So that's a form that we made that all teachers, assistants, therapists, anyone who works with students can fill out a behavior incident report based on behaviors they're seeing in their classroom. And so we just fill in the latest data on that. And this year we really focused on tracking students with IEPs. We have a large population of students on IEPs in our program, and BIRs on peers, and sort of comparing those. And then this year, a lot of times if a student is on an IEP and behaviors being addressed on the IEP, then the classroom team will address those behaviors and we just might consult with them. But we are more likely to develop a Tier 2 plan for peers that don't have any other interventions. So we're focusing on that more this year. So yeah, we fill in all the numbers from the BIR summary. monthly. And then we talk about who are the students that are on tier 2, what are the behaviors, what are the motivations, and then what are the actions, who's gone into the classroom, who's filled out a problem solving meeting guide, and then kind of how it's going. And we also have a separate spreadsheet that we kind of keep track of who's on tier 2, like when they started, how it's going, and we fill in even more specific data on that one. So this is more just kind of who's on it and what are the actions that are being taken, and how is it going. So so that's our version of an office referral, because we don't have office referrals. We're actually our classrooms are spread out throughout the district. We have a couple of buildings that are preschool only, but then we have several elementary buildings and one high school that has some preschool classrooms within. And so this is the form that everybody across the program uses to track the behaviors. So are there any questions about anything? And this is, I forget where this was based on a template I think Michelle gave us a few years ago, and then we just sort of modified it a little bit. I did get that other template over the summer, and we kind of tried to modify that, but we kind of kept coming back to this form, and this really seemed to work better for our program. We don't really do check in, check out with our little ones. And so this sort of met our needs, and we just kind of adjust it every year as needed. But so far this form has worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because you have to build this to fit your own environment or your own culture. And if it doesn't, that's why when we suggest some of these templates and tools, we say these are suggestions, these are kind of examples of how you can do it. But if it doesn't fit what you're doing, don't use it. I mean, or take what makes sense for you, as long as some of those non-negotiables are there, like making sure you know how many kids you're entering, make sure you know how many kids are being successful, making sure you know how many kids need additional intervention. So I think that's a great point. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Christina. So I'm going to does anybody have any questions for Christina? I'm going to go ahead and go back to share my screen. And I am going to go to the next slide, which is kind of opening it up to questions, either for Christina or any thoughts that you guys have right now as you're implementing tier 2. Is there, and I'll give it wait time for a minute. And if there are none, we'll move on. But if there's anybody that wants to ask a question or talk about what they're doing for their tier 2, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that. Feel free to unmute or populate the chat.
Heidi, we have a question in the chat about whether or not Christina is able to share that blank agenda or template with the group.
It's fine with me. Michelle, do you have the ability to share that with the group?
I do not. I think that let me try and download and see if I can put it in a different spot so everyone has access.
And I can always send that out. Usually what I will do is I'll send a recording of this morning's meeting. I can always link it in there as well. That will go out after the meeting this morning. I'm happy to do that. Other questions or thoughts about what you guys are doing for tier 2? Again, I will say, as I've been doing tier 2 TFI assessments, we're seeing a lot of great practices and a lot of interventions being done. But what I think some teams are struggling with is how to make these practices to be systemic and systematic. And I think that's the hardest part. I was working with a team last night, and one of the things on the TFI says, when you enter a student into a tier 2 intervention, are they in that intervention within 72 hours? And so the team kind of looked at me with like deer in headlight kind of a look and saying, how are teams doing that? Well, teams are doing that because they have these systems built. And I think when you're not quite there yet, as far as having this be systematic, I think it's difficult to be able to get that help to kids within 72 hours. So those are the exact those are the exact things that we're seeing as we continue to go out and work with tier 2 teams. Is, you know, it's the practices are there. It's really those systemic pieces that the teams are struggling with. And sometimes it has to do with staff and not having enough people. And sometimes it has to do with time and when do you get this done. And so I really wanted to open it up this morning. If there are any people that are, anybody out there that are struggling with some of those things, and if we have any recommendations. So I'll throw it out one last time. And if they're not, we can go ahead and move on. But any other thoughts or questions about implementing tier 2 pieces, parts of tier 2, time considerations, team considerations, any of that? And please, again, feel free to unmute or populate the chat. And
Hi,
again,
I have a question. Sorry.
go ahead, Darla.
Regarding the form that you shared with us, the team meeting minutes, I wonder how we can print that or use that or download that. I mean, it's in the presentation, but if we wanted to use that form and maybe modify it slightly.
I think Michelle's working on trying to get access. And if we can't do it during the meeting this morning, I will send it out after. I'll send out a link after with the meeting recording. We'll make sure you guys get it if you need it.
Oh, okay. I thought what she was going to give us a copy of was something that Christina uses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think she's speaking about the check-in and check-out
Right.
agenda that you shared prior to Chris's agenda,
yes.
Heidi.
I'm sorry, Darla.
Yes.
Yes. I can, what I will do is, as Rachel's going to cover one of our updates, and as she's doing that, I will put a link in the chat of where you can find all of the different tier 2 agenda formats, and you can choose what makes the best sense for you. PBISapps.org has about, I don't know, there's a lot of them, but you can go in and look and see that's kind of where I pulled that other template from. And you can go in, and some of them are specifically for check and check out. Some of them are for other tier 2 interventions. I will make sure that you get that link in the chat. Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood, Darla.
No, thanks so much.
So any last thoughts on that before we kind of move on to our updates for this morning? Any last thoughts? I was bad with wait time when I was a teacher, and I think I'm worse now that I do these meetings. All right. Well, if you guys have questions, please feel free at any other time during our morning meeting this morning to chime in and ask. So I'm going to throw it over to Rachel, and while she's doing that, I will populate those examples in the chat. So Rachel's going to start with our first update, which is discussing discipline removals. So Rachel, good morning.
Good morning. Actually, Heidi, there was something that just popped up in the chat.
Oh,
So I
okay.
wonder if we should address that now.
Okay, go ahead.
Rather than getting into it. It's from somebody in our group here. Should our PBIS team be working on tier 2 activities when we're still working on tier 1?
Great question. Typically what we say is there is a readiness component that we would be looking at to make sure we're ready to start tier 2. And we would want to make sure we're at least looking at those readiness features before we start. But what happens with a lot of teams, and it's realistic, is that they go back and make some of the things in their tier 1 a little stronger while they're starting to build their tier 2. So I have seen that happen. What we would definitely say is that if you are not at least at 70% on tier 1 on the TFI, and there's some other things too, like do you have a healthy triangle? Do you have a system for collecting minor behaviors? There are about 8 or 10 considerations you would really want to have in place before delving very strongly into tier 2. Can you do both of those things at the same time? Absolutely. But you would really want to make sure that your tier 1 is pretty solid before you start on tier 2. I'm not sure if that answers the question. If you need more, please unmute or put in the chat. But you really want to look at those readiness features. And sometimes, like I said, when people look at those readiness features, they're kind of working on both at the same time. But you at least have to be 70%. You want to make sure you're possibly looking at the self-assessment survey. You want to make sure you have a way to collect your minor behaviors, and you really want to make sure that you have a healthy system, meaning 80 to 85% in green, 10 to 15% in yellow, 1 to 5% in red. So that's how I would answer that question. Thanks, Rachel.
No, thank you, Heidi. I knew you would have the expert answer on that one, so that's why I
Not an
wanted you
expert,
to
but
answer.
I know I've seen that triangle about a gazillion times. So yeah.
So we just want to throw in here a little blog post that came across our desk recently from Valerie Williams, who is one of the directors of OSEP, the Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services. So she's been doing this blog series, and the link is there for you to be able to read the blog post. It literally only took me about 3 minutes to read it. It's very short, but it has some really excellent information about informal removals. And so that's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, Heidi.
I lost my
so
train. There you go. Sorry.
So it talks a little bit, OSEP had released some guidance back in July 2022 about informal removals, but Valerie kind of goes a little bit more in depth about it and gives some other additional considerations about informal removals. And I'm sure we've all seen these working in the schools. You know, when I was a school psychologist, we definitely had students that left halfway through the day because of behavioral issues and things like that. But really this blog post kind of expands on this concept of informal removals and about how having informal removals could really result in a denial of access to or significant changes in a child's educational program. And that could be considered as part of the 10 days of suspension and really constitute an informal change of placement. So an example could be when an administrator unilaterally informs a parent, hey, your child's been having some difficult struggles with their behavior. They have to have a shortened school day now. Or a teacher does not allow a child to go to art class because maybe they were being unsafe with their hands and using materials earlier that day. And they say, hey, instead of going to art, you're staying with me today because of your behavioral choices that you've been making. So those types of actions could be considered disciplinary removals. And so what Valerie is talking about in her blog post, and she used an example from her own child as well, that this could really be indicative of a larger systemic issue. If you are seeing that you are consistently having to do these informal removals with students. And so that really may trigger some of these other processes that need to take place, such as child find, having IEP revisions needing to be made, whether it's the behavioral goals that they have or the services or aid support, that sort of thing. Or it could also warrant that a functional behavior analysis is needed if you are seeing a continuing pattern and trend of a child struggling with their behavior and choices that they are making, and you need to implement some type of behavior plan as a result. Or it could also let you know it's indicative that your staff need more training at the classroom level of what are things that they can implement from day to day to keep students and prevent escalation of behaviors and be proactive with their classroom management strategies. So looking at those evidence-based practices. And as you know, Valerie talks a little bit about in her blog post, sometimes informal removals have been used as a way to prevent counting days towards suspension. And so that's something that really we're looking at a denial of FAPE too, when a child is removed from their environment and they don't have access to their educational programming or their special education services. And so overall, what is the big picture here? If informal removals continue on a consistent pattern and basis, no one really wins in the long term, in the long run, because you also have to think about the ramifications of this practice. If it were to continue, the damage to the homeschool relationship, it really hurts your credibility as educational professionals because parents start to lose faith in the school and in the system and feel like their children can't be educated in that setting, and then they start looking at alternatives. Students might feel as though they no longer belong to that school environment, and that could also be a risk factor for dropout later on. So we really encourage everyone to really think about how, are you using informal removals, in what way, in what manner, Is that a systemic practice in your building or your district that really needs to be looked at more closely? And do you really need to maybe consider some other practices or procedures to take place, or some training that your staff needs in order to kind of get away from these informal removals? And also, if you were to click the blog post by Valerie, she also has a few other really fantastic interesting blog posts that also go along with this, and some Q&As. She also talks about the impact and harm of exclusionary discipline in one blog post, and she has another blog post about how do our discipline policies reflect our priorities as a district. So that's something that could also be, something to look at. And so these are some really great resources from Valerie in this blog post. It's a very short one, like Heidi's showing on the screen. It took me maybe 3 minutes to read, but it did give me some food for thought, because I have seen these things happen when I worked in buildings myself. And so it just gives you some food for thought. So thank you so much, Heidi, for pulling that up. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Rachel. So we've been having a lot of these kind of discussions recently. So we wanted to really make you guys aware that these, sometimes when students are missing instruction, it really can be considered a removal. And so that's something for your teams to think about, and your schools to think about, because it, especially if you have a student on an IEP, that has big implications. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our other updates. Thank you. We'll probably finish early today because we have a small group, which that is reinforcing behavior, right? Well, you come and you get to leave early. The next update that we have is that Ohio PBIS has just released their website for professional development. They've been working on it for a long, long time. It is called PBIS Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, Ohio PBIS Training, ohiopbis.org is the website. And currently there are 4 series of trainings on the website. One is, you can see them on your screen. It takes the whole child database decision-making. They have one on the TFI, and they have one that supports the whole child. They are continuing to create more content for this website, and they're continuing to film actual practices happening throughout the state. So currently you can go on, I believe you have to sign up for an account, but it's free. So if you do need internal training for your teams, these are great resources to have. If you need a refresher, if you need to get people up to speed, this is a great resource to have. And as I said, they are going to continue to add more content to it, and there's going to be more training. I know there's going to be some tier 2 stuff that's coming on there, as well as some of the actual tier 1 online modules as well, I believe. So they're very high quality. They're interactive, and there's a lot of great examples within those modules. So ohiopbis.org. And again, I believe you have to sign up for an account, but it's free. The other thing we wanted to remind our secondary folks is that the high school think tanks are continuing. And again, that's not through us. That's something it's a national resource. But the next one is occurring on March 17th. I didn't realize it. I think is that St. Patrick's Day. And so what you need to do is just click on the link at 12:30. You don't have to pre-register. And what this resource is, it's secondary educators from across the country, all over the country actually, that get together for an hour and they problem solve issues about PBIS at the secondary level. We know that PBIS in high schools looks different. And so this is a resource for people to get together and problem solve and hear from other like educators who are experiencing the same kind of issues. Michelle is reminding us that the early learning the modules are early learning approved or OCRA approved or Ohio approved. And so that's also great for your early learning programs, that you can get credit for that, because we know those folks always need to get credit. So again, if you're a secondary educator, I highly recommend just jumping on and talking to other people who are experiencing the same kind of issues that you might be in your secondary school. And I continue, the sun keeps moving and I'm looking weird in the camera, and I apologize for that. State recognition office hours, open office hours. We are going to be offering that 2 more times. If you guys have applied or have done your attempt to apply for recognition, we have two more opportunities to come and ask questions since the procedure and process is completely different this year. We wanted to make sure we offer that to you guys. I know that there's been questions about the upload of materials, about what needs to be included. They are asking for less evidence this year because both self-assessment survey SAS and student outcome data are required. So because of that, there is less evidence, but you cannot share links as some of you guys have done in the past. You need to upload all your information to Google folders. So we will be holding 2 more open office hours to answer any kind of questions. As always, you can reach out to your PBIS consultants. They can answer questions for you as well. And then another update that we do have for you is there are people continually ask me, are there grants available? Is there grant money available for us to do this work? There are 2 grants that are currently going to be available. One is called the Stronger Connections Grant, and that if you have the slides, you can click directly on that link. This is going to be funding for safer and healthier learning environments. The deadline for that grant is April 1st. And then there is a school safety training grant that will be due March 31st, and that is funding for school safety initiatives, including training and school climate programs. So I think with PBIS, there is an arguable point that you can use some of PBIS to maybe do some of that work. I am going to come off screen here because I'm looking kind of odd. But you can look at either one of these grants. The links are there for additional monies to do this work. So like I said, I continually get questions about, is there money? Are there grants? And these are a couple of them that have come down the pike. So you guys can have information about that. And then our last PBIS Leaders Network is going to be May 4th. It is going to be in person. And with that in person, it's going to be 2 hours. We are really hoping to have a student panel to share their perspective and their voice regarding school, climate, and environment. I have sent out a couple of emails. We've posted it on our on some of the things that come out from our office, and I have not had any takers yet. So if you guys know of any students on May 4th, just for an hour virtually, who might be interested in serving on a student panel, please let me know, because we are really hoping to get a student panel going to hear about student voice as far as climate is concerned. If you have any, and I'm thinking probably more middle school to high school age students, we would and it would only be an hour of their time, and it would be done virtually. They wouldn't have to leave school. But we're really hoping to do that. We have other things planned for that network meeting in May as well, but we're really, really hoping to get some student voice and some student perspective as far as what do students really want to see in their schools and their school environment and in their and in the climate of their buildings. So we're really hoping to be able to do that. So please forward, if you're interested, please contact me. We would really like to have a couple of students talk about that or be willing to answer some questions about that. So that is really it for, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. That is really it. So I can see you, and I'm going to block myself out because I have the sun right in my face here. All right. See if that's a little bit better. Okay, the sun is moving and you keep saying these. So that's really it for today. And Darla, I have not forgotten about you. I'm going to show you where you can find that information as far as tier 2 resources for agendas and minutes. So I am going to share my screen again in a minute.
Heidi, we also have another question in the chat, so let me know whenever you're ready for
Yeah,
it.
why don't you go ahead and do that, and I'll pull that stuff up. Go ahead.
Okay, this is from Timothy, and what are examples of something PBIS related we could do with the Stronger Connections grant? I looked it up yesterday, but it wasn't clear exactly what we could do with it.
Good question. I'm not very familiar. That grant just came out. If you give me some time to do some research, Tim, I can get back to you on that. I think any of your PBIS activities should be able to fit, but if you're looking for specific examples it's really about people making connections, I think, from what the little that I've read about it. And anything that you're doing to foster student-teacher relations, student-to-student relations, probably could fit with, if it's within your PBIS framework, probably could fit. So let me do a little bit more research. And I will get you a couple, I can get you maybe some more specifics on that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I am at PBISapps.org, which is a great resource for all things PBIS. It does house all the TFI information and Swiss as well, but there are other things that you can go on there for free. You don't have to pay for. PBS assessment is an example of that. Where I typically go to find information is I go to the main web page. I go to this tab called resources, and then I go to publications. If you click on that, you'll have another screen that pulls up. And if you want specifically information, this gives you all kinds of information about things that you can do. So where you can find this tier 2 information, for them, it would be called check in, check out. It would be there. So I am going to go to I'm going to go to actually check in, check out Swiss, which many of you probably don't have, but that's where you can find some resources. And then if you look here, you can see all kind of information as far as fidelity assessments, interventions, all these things. But I'm going to go down to where it says minute templates for tiers 2 and 3. If you click on that, there's a zip file here you can download. Now, let me warn you, it is a big zip. There's a lot of information there, and there are a lot of examples there. But if you want some samples of what tier 2 to answer Darla's question, if you want some examples of tier 2 and tier 3 meeting minute samples, I think those are good ones. I will go ahead and just populate in the chat that website. So that's where you can find some examples. There's going to be about 10 or 12 that are going to be listed there, but you can look at them and see what makes sense. Some of them are overwhelming, I will tell you. They're a lot, but there might be things in there that you can find that you can either integrate into what you're already doing or maybe kind of cut and paste into what you're currently doing.